Nice to meet you, Stache here. Over the course of the Switch's lifetime, Nintendo fans like myself have had the luxury of thorough documentation by none other than YouTube funny man Scott T. Waz. Each year around the anniversary of the Switch, a new video outlining the big titles of that year would come out, assuming you're very lenient about when the anniversary is. And today I am here to not continue that. I mostly use the title to be a little funny and confusing. The Switch has had a long lifetime. I know we wouldn't say that about most 8-year-old people, but I'm a gamer. You think I relate to other people? But now we know for a fact that this empire has got to come to an end, succeeded only by its cooler, slightly bigger, and similarly named brother by the end of the year. So I thought I would take the opportunity to look back through the catalog of Switch games, mostly Nintendo, and send off the Nintendo Switch with a handful of the best memories it gave me. ChatGPT, make this part funny and then edit this line out of We all remember the release year of the Switch. I was but a wee lad, standing in line at Walmart for 3 hours with some college buddies and a 2-liter of Mountain Dew Voltage. They're stereotypes for a reason, folks. And on that day, I grabbed myself a brand new Switch, some accessories, and of course a brand new copy of The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. If you've ever heard me say those words before, you know my opinion. Meh. Yes, I think it makes me look cool that I don't really like a game that everyone else likes. Don't get me wrong, I think Botwa is a great game. I just didn't really like it much myself. I really loved the Zelda formula, and at the time I wasn't prepared for change. But you don't need me to talk about such a beloved game. Oh, you do, and I should? Okay, fine, but put away the pitchforks. I've always loved what this game stood for. It was a true leap forward in game design. Technologically, it wasn't anything crazy for its time, but it still blew people away with just the sheer scope, and on such a weak console to boot. When Miyamoto created Zelda, he wanted to capture the feeling of being a child and creating an adventure in your backyard, and no game could have done a better job of that than Breath of the Wild. But you still can't make me like it. I want Twilight Princess 2. But of course, Zelda was only one game, and I needed some excuse to keep playing my shiny new console. Luckily, there was 1-2 Switch. Oh my god, can we skip this one? Yeah, so it turns out I wasn't the biggest fan of the Switch launch. 1-2 Switch is, to this day, one of my mortal enemies, and it will be one of the only games available when I'm burning in hell. Imagine Wii Sports, except it's a small collection of minigames, and it costs $50! Ouch! Price tag aside, the game wasn't that bad. It was a little goofy and small, but it showed off the hardware well. But no matter how you cut it, there's just not $50 worth of content here. Which sucks because hell lasts a long time. But the other launch title I picked up was Snipperclips, and I feel like people don't remember Snipperclips. How dare you? Snipperclips was a fun little puzzle game, best enjoyed in co-op, where you could rotate and cut out pieces of the players to make useful shapes. It was a novel premise, and oh look, the characters almost look like Joy-Cons. How neat. So yeah, it was a bit of a rough launch year for the Nintendo. Oh my god! Let me be very clear. I was not a Mario fan prior to 2017. I had played a lot of platformers, but was never truly grabbed by any with a red plumber involved. Odyssey changed that for me. I don't have a great grasp on how well this game was received, because I was far too busy playing it. There were just so many things to do and discover, and yes, I needed a guide. I'm not that smart. Odyssey was a deeply complex Mario game with so many moving elements, but it certainly wasn't the most difficult, and that's where some of the beauty of it comes in. The first playthrough, I was so distracted by all of the fancy enemies showing up and the carefully planned challenges and stages that I barely controlled Mario, let alone learned any of his special movements. But then, as I was rounding up some of the last moons, one of the Koopa racers did this, and the only thing on my mind was how to replicate that. Mario has such a uniquely fun suite of abilities in this game, and once you learn this particular maneuver, everything is broken wide open. I did a second playthrough after some time and found myself ignoring transformations most of the time because it was so much more satisfying to try and do everything as Mario. It's a game that somehow prods you to explore as much as possible in every direction, and it took so long for that direction to be Mario's movement that I will never forget this video game for as long as I am alive. But clearly it was not good enough for a sequel, so we're moving on. 2018 was a good year for the Switch, but not necessarily for Nintendo fans. Most of what we got was just ports of Wii U games, and when they weren't ports, they were just bad. It seems like Nintendo was as desperate to get rid of the Wii U as all of us were, and didn't really have a lot planned for the early years of their soon-to-be wildly successful console, which is how we ended up with Kirby Star Allies. If you're ever thinking you don't have enough titles, just drop a hint at HAL Labs and there'll be a new Kirby game by lunch. I managed to trim an hour off of this video by excluding all of the Kirby spin-offs I played.
Look a ball. Ball, man.
But back to Star Allies. I need to out myself a bit and say I really liked this game at the time. I love co-op titles, and I actually had friends to play it with. It was quite possibly the best time in my life. Don't read into that. But looking back, it's easy to see why this game wasn't the best received title out there. Even for a Kirby title, this game is criminally easy. Especially after they started adding characters, it was so easy to just delete any boss from existence that it's strange they were even included. It was a bit of a shame because I loved Kirby's Return to Dreamland on the Wii and didn't play it on the Switch for some reason, so this was my only 2D Kirby game in the last decade or so. Anybody else feeling old all of a sudden? And I wish there was more to say about one of my favorite franchises, but really it was just a passable game that you could play with your at-the-time 5-year-old brother with no issues. We all had one of those, I assume. But Kirby isn't the only title released in 2018, no. We also got Steven Universe, Save the Light, and OKKO Let's Play Heroes 2 games in 1. Oh wait, I was talking about disappointing games. Remember the Labo? Ah, Nintendo Labo. In college, my entire personality was owning a Switch, and I tried my hardest to defend this. I mean, it's a cool premise, don't get me wrong. I love the idea of building controllers and having all sorts of different wacky things made out of cardboard that you store in your closet only to get crushed and be unusable. But the games were somehow even flimsier than the cardboard. Nintendo really put a lot of stock into the novelty of the whole thing, which is a shame because I think this idea could have kept going if the included software was actually worth the time. But that's okay. 2018 was also the year of Mario Party's return. No more riding around in the same vehicle like the last few games, and surely given the theme I've been talking about, there's no way this game could be disappointing. Super Mario Party released to a collective sigh of relief. It wasn't the greatest entry in the franchise, but it did promise to stop doing that stupid car thing everybody hated. Instead, it did a stupid dice block thing that only DK and Bowser players liked. I was one of the former. This game felt almost like an extended tech demo, if I'm being fully honest. It might be one of the only games to fully utilize the Joy-Con while still being an actual game, but it only barely checks both of those boxes. 4 boards to play on makes this one of the smallest Mario Party games in history, and to make matters worse, they were a bit bland thanks to the new game mode they introduced. A special 2v2 party mode existed where the entire board was on a grid system, and you and your partner could move around it at will at the same time. It was boring. Mario Party is built on a hotbed of terrible RNG and pretending there's strategy involved, but this mode was practically actual strategy, which is just lame. Wait, that's not what I meant. I play strategy games. And just when the Switch's first party lineup felt like it couldn't get any worse, they blew us away for the second year in a row. Literally. Like the meme. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was the long-awaited sequel to Brawl, if only because it was available on a console people actually owned. With the hype-building tagline, "Everyone is here," it was time for Smash fans of all eras to join together and they didn't bring back Smash Run? What the f? We had a single-player offering, which was probably the most notable missing feature on Smash for 3DS and Wii U. World of Light was a fun little outing, but I think more than anything, it just made people wish we had a new Subspace Emissary. There was a lot of charm in seeing our favorite characters interact in a wacky story, and they didn't really do that in Ultimate. But all that aside, we did get a great game with a huge roster that didn't stop on day one. Notable characters from well-known video games would finally make their Smash debut, and Waluigi would still not be in a Smash game and never will. I really hope Nintendo released something big so I can run away from that last statement. What do you mean a port of a 2D Mario game from a franchise with titles so similar you probably couldn't tell them apart at a glance? And they kept the U from Wii U? Nintendo would continue to port over major Wii U titles for the entire lifetime of the Switch. They had to make the money back from that system somehow, and the games were good, so I guess it makes sense. But I'm not gonna keep reacting to them, okay? Comedy comes in threes, and I'm 27, I don't know math. Besides, by 2019, Nintendo's developers had plenty of time to start playing around and coming up with new ideas. And we finally started to see some big names we hadn't heard from in a while, like Super Mario Maker 2. It's Super Mario Maker with a number at the end. Yeah, it was pretty popular, and yes, I did get it, even though I'm terrible at creating levels and don't like popular fan levels because they're too hard. There was a single-player mode, but it wasn't anything new, really. It was just a bit of a step up from the previous title, and again, on a console that people actually wanted. When I say big titles in 2019, I'm of course referring to... Wait, really? I mean... Obviously, it's got to be Fire Emblem Three Houses. I played this one. Why aren't you clapping for me? I like strategy games, I'm just really bad at them. And sometimes they're a bit too slow for me, okay? I don't have big brain like you do. But as far as things go for me, someone who hasn't played many titles in the franchise, this one is easily the best. It's not time for me to make fun of Engage yet, but comparing the two helped me realize what I liked so much about Three Houses. It's actually good. Fire Emblem is a game with a lot of systems and housekeeping. You have to pause a lot to have random conversations cutscenes and such because it will improve gameplay elements, and it can be really annoying to do that. I mean, that's still in Three Houses, but it took it one step further with the class system. You're not only improving relationships between the characters and learning their stories, you are their teacher. It is up to you, the player, to make sure each character has the strengths necessary to build into your army and guide them along that path. It's a really fun and interesting system, but otherwise still a game with a lot of dialogue, so buyer beware. Had I been a fan of this franchise, the dialogue might have been more fun for me, but even when I am playing a strategy game, I always just want to be in the action, and these games have a lot of downtime between those action sections. And yes, by action I do mean clicking on a guy and telling him where to move one by one. 2019 also introduced us to a brand new IP, Astral Chain, and everyone collectively said, "Oh cool, a new IP," and then continued to not buy it. You can be mad at me for saying that all you want, I still refuse to believe you played this game. In other news, Tetris Battle Royale. The Battle Royale trend was a bit silly. Everyone wanted to capitalize on the absolutely massive success of Fortnite and just assumed it was the number of players that was causing it, I guess. Most copycats tried to remain more faithful to the core gameplay, but Nintendo was never good at copying others' homework. They've released 3 different Battle Royale type games as far as I can remember, and while it may have been to hop on a trend that still hasn't died out to this day, they're all kind of fun. Tetris 99 makes a lot of sense. It's the type of game that doesn't require a lot of skill or knowledge to pick up, and because of the wacky nature of big Battle Royale games like this, chances are you can get pretty far even without knowing crazy tricks. Mario 35 was a bit more niche, but that's okay because it also doesn't exist anymore. It was just meant to be a fan celebration, and I think they wanted to take it down before people realized it was not a game with a long lifespan. And then they took it from 0 to 100 with F-Zero 99. It's not that crazy, I just wanted to make that joke. But it is strange to see them revive an overly dead franchise with a retro battle royale. I kinda hope they do more like this in the future because they're all fun little games. 2019 was a great year for franchise revivals as it turned out, since we got a sort of spiritual successor to Wii Fit in the form of Ring Fit Adventure. Keeping the tradition of strange peripherals, this game had a giant Mario Kart steering wheel. It forces you to exercise. How much do you think I know about this game? Ring Fit Adventure was in fact the only 2 weeks I thought I might get in shape until I realized that even the video game was hard. My brain really wanted to keep pushing ahead and doing more levels, but that just tired me out very quickly. But there were RPG things to do and I had to do them. So I burnt out in like a week, but I think it's a really cool idea. Aside from the very unique peripherals, the game found an interesting way to turn exercise into a game. I just cannot stress enough that I am not in any way fit. But the revivals continued this year as Nintendo released Luigi's Mansion 3. Whether or not the Luigi's Mansion franchise was dead is not for me to say, but it certainly didn't feel alive and kicking when this game came out. I, like many others, am a huge fan of cult classic Luigi's Mansion. The sequel on the 3DS did not live up to that hype, however, so it was good to see that they were still trying. And Luigi's Mansion 3 was certainly better. I definitely wouldn't say it was better than the original, but it had a lot of charm and character put into it, and it felt much more like an adventure than the 3DS title, even if it did feel like the mission-based format bled over a little bit. And of course, Luigi's Mansion wasn't the only sequel to a 3DS game this year. Nintendo really wanted to kill all of their other consoles. And they did that with Pokemon Sword and Shield, the very first mainline games to be released on a home console. It definitely shows. Generation 8 of Pokemon came under a lot of fire for reusing old 3DS models that had been used for a while. To me, the models are not the worst part of this game. It is one of the least visually appealing titles I've ever played. Add to that a healthy helping of mediocre Pokemon in the region, and I'll stop insulting this franchise when I'm dead. It's also the first Pokemon title to have DLC, which is always a great sign for major franchises. I'm sure we won't see that trend continue. Sorry if I seem overly annoyed with Pokemon, it's just because I absolutely am. I think they're getting better though, so we'll see what the future holds. And as much as I personally despise the person who refuses to make Pokemon any better, the fans seemed to enjoy it, or at least I think so. 2019 was such a long time ago. 2020 was a big year. The Nintendo Switch certainly wasn't unsuccessful before, but something about being stuck inside for some unknown reason that historians don't remember meant that everyone needed to be doing something, and the Switch was a more affordable answer to that problem. Add to the fact that Animal Crossing New Horizons came out at almost the exact time we were all quarantined, and Switch sales shot through the roof. A new Animal Crossing title is always a big moment for a console, which is why the Wii U didn't get one. But a game about living a quiet, peaceful life on a beautiful island and interacting with your neighbors at a time when we couldn't? If I didn't know any better, I'd say Nintendo had a hand in the pandemic, which is absolutely a joke, please don't sue me. On top of all of the ingredients for success that they already had, it released the same day as Doom Eternal, and the internet went a bit crazy with that. That's all I can say before this video gets demonetized. Alright, what else? Remake. Oh yeah! Clubhouse Games, 51 Worldwide Classics. I didn't play this one, I just didn't realize it was published by Nintendo. Here we go. Paper Mario the Origami King. Boy do I have mixed opinions on this game I never played. In an effort to keep things short in case I ever talk about this franchise later, Paper Mario has a troubled history. Everyone loved the first two games, the third game was very different but had a cult following, and just about everyone disliked the fourth and fifth games. They were right to do so. But basically, we had seen a pretty heavy downward trend in Paper Mario leading up to this new title, so Origami King was pretty much our last chance at redemption for a beloved franchise. It kinda worked, I guess? From what I can tell, we're all just saying it was a good enough game so that Nintendo doesn't give up on making more of them. It definitely seemed to be going in the right direction anyways. The buddies made a return, the story seemed better, and I'm sorry I didn't play this one. I'm more of a Mario and Luigi guy. I'm gonna put up a picture of Bobby and move on before I embarrass myself. Oh boy, Super Mario 3D All-Stars. I have an unopened physical copy and I will never sell it or use it. I may have forgotten to mention, but 2020 marked Super Mario's 35th anniversary, which is why we got Mario 35, but also a limited time release of a sequel to Super Mario All-Stars? This game had been rumored for ages. People loved the included games and were hoping for a way to play them in a more modern setting, and Nintendo was happy to kind of answer. At the time, we didn't have N64 Online, so this was the best you got. But I did mention that it was a limited time release. You can't buy this game anymore. The game was for sale long enough that anyone who wanted it probably got it, but it's such a strange thing to do, especially considering it was on the digital storefront. Oh, you want to know about the game itself? It's Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, and Mario Galaxy. They're all great. What do you want from me? By this point in time, Nintendo had stopped trying to push Labo. Certainly the sales weren't keeping up with all the extra costs for cardboard, but they always have to be doing something, so they gave us Mario Kart Live Home Circuit. Boy, did my nerdy self wish that I had a home to circuit in. The basic idea was that you set up tracks in your own home and then race around it using RC carts that connected with the game. I can only imagine such a novel, one-time experience. I've never really understood RC cars, so maybe this one wasn't fully for me, even though I desperately wanted an excuse to get it. A game I didn't need a desperate excuse for was a strange indie collaboration title. The developers of Crypt of the Necrodancer approached Nintendo to see if they could use some of their characters in a Switch port of their game. Somehow this led to them making a crossover game instead. Cadence of Hyrule is one of my all-time favorite Zelda games. I don't know if it's truly fair to put it on the list, but it is the best aspects of Crypt of the Necrodancer mixed with the best aspects of The Legend of Zelda. The wider open spaces of the overworld allow you to get your bearings better, the progression is much more noticeable, and the plethora of tools you collect make for interesting puzzle solving and an almost Metroid style of progression. It's also one of the only Zelda games I've ever gotten full heart containers in, and given its roguelike nature, one that I've completed multiple times. They even added multiple playable characters post-launch, some of which had their own special story modes. This game is packed with content, and if you haven't played it up to this point, I definitely recommend crossing it off before the Switch 2 takes up all of your game time. Because of Animal Crossing dominating the minds of most people for the first year of quarantine, it is a bit shocking as I researched to find out just how many titles that I loved released this year. Ever heard of Dynasty Warriors? Because they've made 4 Nintendo crossover titles. Third on that ever-expanding list was the first Switch title, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. I really liked the original Hyrule Warriors, but it definitely had the potential to get very repetitive. Don't get me wrong, that's pretty much standard for Dynasty Warriors titles. The combat involves you hitting the same combos so many times, especially early on when you don't have any options. But the way Breath of the Wild's core abilities were implemented into this one made for a game flow that felt really good. There was a lot more reason to branch out and actual reason to react to certain attacks in certain ways. It wasn't the most complex edition in the world, but I'm already looking for something simple when I pick up one of these games, so I'm kinda grateful they didn't go too far. As it stands, this is one of the best titles if you're looking for something a bit more mindless with the Zelda name slapped onto it. Of course, none of these Zelda-themed entries were a sequel to Breath of the Wild, so aside from me, I imagine fans were getting rather impatient with 2020. Which of course leads us into another remake. Not one of the Zelda ones, sorry. Nintendo has started a trend of adding at least something to make their remakes a bit more worth it. So while they were trying to bring back Super Mario 3D World from a dead console, they also gave us Bowser's Fury. Not the longest title by far, more of a tech demo if anything, Bowser's Fury was fresh and exciting. While there wasn't a whole lot to it you can probably beat and complete it in just a few hours, what was there was really cool. The seamless gameplay and interconnected nature of everything really stand out here. One big map for you to run around and explore, and of course Plessy Ride music. This game continues to be hope for what they might be doing with future Mario. I just kinda hoped it would happen a bit sooner. I would love to talk more about it, but I already beat the whole game again since you started watching this video. The Switch was becoming something of an all-console. Smash's tagline, "Everyone is here," seemed to apply to games on the console itself. Of course, we were getting a bunch of third-party support, but also loads of Nintendo franchises were coming back that we hadn't seen in a while, and frankly weren't expecting to. Which leads us to new Pokemon Snap, an on-rail shooter shooter where instead of guns, you're taking pictures of Pokemon, and it's a sequel to an N64 title that released 22 years prior, and people liked it? I think I would like new Pokemon Snap if I ever gave it a try, but I didn't really have any of the nostalgia this title was tapping into, so I never picked it up. What mattered more to me was the fact that just about anything was possible on this system. Nintendo was pulling out all the stops at this point. They were just making anything they felt like. They could even make DC Superhero Girls Teen Power if they wanted to, and I guess they did want to. Again, not interested in the game, just strange that Nintendo published it. Even stranger still, they could release a mascot sports title with Mario on the cover. Yes, many of the sports titles saw a return on the Switch, although return might not be the right word. I can't stress enough how few people bought a Wii U. It was less than the GameCube! And of the many franchises that came back, I only played Golf. It was Golf. It had a story mode, yes, that's why I played it. I do not have friends. Which is exactly why I forced my friends to play the next game with me, Warioware Get It Together. Another franchise that was on the rocks in the era of Nintendo's decline, a lot of people were happy to see a new game. Or just me. One of those statements is probably true. It was certainly a departure from previous titles, to say the least. As opposed to fast microgames with various controls, it was fast microgames with the same controls that you had to apply to different situations. One of the big selling points was playing with other people, which I did manage to do for once. And only once. The game did not live for very long in my household. While it was nice to see Wario return, the new style was just weird enough to make it a bit more of a novel experience than anything else. The only thing it really did for me was raise hope that maybe the developers would come back to make another Rhythm Heaven game. That game will not be talked about today, as it does not exist. And finally, the pinnacle of dead franchise revivals. After years of fan anticipation following the release of Metroid Prime 3 in 2007 on the Wii, we finally got Metroid Dread. Oh. Yeah, fans were probably hoping for something a bit more 3D, but I prefer the 2D games anyway, and this is my video. In terms of 2D Metroid games, aside from a pretty decent remake of Samus Returns, this was the first truly new title since Metroid Fusion in 2002. And while we have had a lot of great Metroidvanias from indie devs over the years, can I just say y'all are sleeping on this one. Metroid Dread has some of the greatest control, movement, upgrades, and flow of any Metroidvania I've ever played in my life. They have well and truly cut down on the famous Metroid moments of bombing every square inch by, honestly, kind of making the path a bit more linear. Yeah, I love this game, but I wouldn't fault anyone for claiming it's a bit more hand-holdy than the rest of the franchise. Basically, every time you get a new upgrade, your path will loop back around to the spot they want you to use it. But the fights were cool, the bosses were cooler, and the story existed, and that was more than enough for me. Add to that the best version of Metroid Stealth with the Emmy encounters, and really, we have a game for the ages. Now, if only we could actually get Prime 4. Instead, we got another Mario Party game with Mario Party Superstars. With a title confusingly similar to the previous one, grandmas were certainly not winning Christmas this year. But Nintendo knew that Super Mario Party was successful due to taking some steps back, and decided to cash in even more on that nostalgia by making a game that was purely in the past. I'm honestly impressed they didn't do this sooner. Superstars takes 5 game boards from N64 Mario Party titles, and a handful of minigames from across the franchise rather than making anything truly new. And because they didn't take the time to do anything new with it, I love it! This was a really good party game. Is it because it took all the good parts of existing party games and melted them down into one palatable experience? No, it's because it took all of the good parts of existing party games and threw in Peach's birthday cake to remind us how bad things could have been. Either way, Super Mario Party brought a return to form, but so little new content that fans were definitely starved by the time this title came out. And even though it was entirely old content, they did a really good job sprucing things up for a modern age. And for the most part, they also chose good boards and minigames, unlike the last time they tried to do this. At this point in time, most consoles would be nearing the end of their life. Maybe that's why the Switch started to slow down, and rather than release big titles from their biggest franchises, they released Pokemon Legends Arceus, baby! I was too young and stupid to make a video about this game when it came out, and I was a fool! A fool, I say! Anyway, yeah, we were still getting major titles, obviously, and Arceus was Pokemon's first foray into a new spin-off franchise that I alone like way more than the actual games. Treading awfully close to an open-world title, this game was packed with much more exploration and a much closer bond to the Pokemon around you. When you encountered something, it wouldn't cut to a battle scene, it would just throw your Pokemon right onto the field and start a fight. It certainly wasn't the most visually appealing, but naive little Stache was willing to forgive it since they were clearly trying something a bit new here. Pokemon could be caught in the wild without fighting them, which made a lot of sense given the much bigger focus this game had on collecting all of the Pokemon. Not only were you a researcher in ancient times, documenting new species and learning about them, but the only reason you were in the past to begin with was because God itself wanted you to catch every single Pokemon which might be the first time any such goal was front and center in a Pokemon game. A bit strange considering their slogan. Maybe the main inspiration for Palworld, this game did a great job of melding a few different genres together. The exploration, crafting, and battling all worked hand in hand, and that helped create the feeling that you were going on a small journey with your Pokemon. Of course, there were only like 2 battles in this game, but that does include one of the hardest Pokemon battles I've ever had in my life. Cynthia, but harder. I really do have to move on though. I just wanted to take a breather to let Pokefans know I'm not against them. I mean, I'm also not with them, but still. Triangle strategy is in this video. That must mean it's time for a miniature rant! I hate the name of this video game. Aside from being the second time Square Enix had a work-in-progress title only to drop one word from it and call it a day, it is a strategy game with a combat triangle. How lazy can you get? Just be a man and call it Fire Emblem. If 2021 was a year for resurrection, 2022 was definitely a year for exploration. So many franchises were branching out and trying new things, and by so many, I do mean 2. But they were a strong 2. And the other one, of course, was Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Do I feel a bit old knowing that the game came out 3 years ago now? Moving on. This game worked so much better than I expected, but looking back at my experience with it, I do have to say, it is kind of bare bones. I mean, Kirby did just transition to 3D, and given the circumstances, it's impressive how much was there to begin with. But the abilities had fewer attacks, there were fewer abilities, and some Kirby staples didn't quite make the transition. It definitely felt like a stepping stone, but it was an incredible stone that did happen to solve a lot of issues with the previous games. For one thing, it certainly wasn't as easy as Star Allies. I feel a bit harsh, so let me be clear here. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is easily one of the best Kirby games. The gameplay is very refined, and if anything was lacking, it was because they spent time polishing what they did have. You know, except for the 3D Mario-ass co-op where player 2 is forced to be Bandana Waddle Dee, who only ever has one set of attacks. Okay, maybe not as bad as Cappy, but still. Wii Sports finally made a return on the Switch with the aptly titled Nintendo Switch Sports. I don't think gaming is in the same novel space as it was with the Wii, so I don't think it garners the same reaction. Some people would still rather play Wii Bowling. Also, will the next title be called Nintendo Switch 2 Sports or Nintendo Switch Sports 2? I'm out here to ask the big questions. Ever heard of Dynasty Warriors? I hope so, because I mentioned them a little while ago. The 4th Nintendo Warriors game is another sequel, this time a Fire Emblem Warriors title set in the universe of 3 houses. I will not name it in order to avoid further confusion. Fire Emblem Warriors that is on the Switch follows a weird alternate timeline story that parallels the original game it draws inspiration from, straight down to having multiple major choices that affect the story. That's right, for this mindless beat 'em up, you have to play through it 3 times! It's not actually that bad. This game was interesting because unlike other Warriors games I've played, the choice of character doesn't affect your playstyle as much as weapon choice, which is customizable. Each character did have their own added effects and abilities, but the weapon triangle from main series Fire Emblem also comes into play in this game. Enemy commanders would be strong or weak against your characters depending on things like the weapon triangle. More like Project Fire Emblem Triangle Strategy Warriors. This made the game feel a bit more strategic. I had characters I liked playing, but also characters in my army that complemented my abilities. With the ability to swap between up to 4 playable characters, it really helped to have a decent spread of weapon types, although this system does mean there's a bit less variety considering there are fewer weapon types than characters. But the teaching system from 3 houses also existed here, meaning you could mold your playable characters into different combat styles that suit your or their strengths. It was another really good hybridization of Warriors' destructive combat and Fire Emblem strategy. But it's been, I don't know, a couple of months since we got a new Pokemon game, so we were about due. Capping off the major titles in 2022, we had Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet. The 9th generation of Pokemon games, meaning we are officially in the over 1000 region of the Pokedex. 1/9 of Vegeta would be so proud. I think I hate this game. I've played it a few times now, which would make you think that I don't, but every time I play it, I get annoyed by the same design mistakes we've had solutions to for decades. In their defense, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is ambitious for Pokemon standards. It is the first truly open-world game, or just about as open as it can get with a few exceptions. And the core gameplay is actually pretty good. I like the openness and the different storylines to follow, giving you different upgrades as you go along. It gives the player a choice in what sort of things they want to be going for and what they should be doing. The problem is every other decision that they made. The world is open, but not really, because levels are static and you don't have much choice aside from going places where the level fits your team. Otherwise, you're likely to have a bit less fun. Either being unable to progress due to strong enemies or just absolutely crushing weak ones. The game doesn't give you any real info to follow based on this, aside from the general rule that more north equals more strong, which isn't even constantly true. The 7th gym is the furthest south part of any story. It's almost guaranteed you're not doing these things in level order anyway, because there's no strong indication otherwise of what you should be doing. And And not only is the dialogue some of the worst in a video game, they decided to compensate by adding even more of it, so you get to spend minutes mashing through unskippable dialogue every time you do any single objective. The story itself isn't even that bad. I kind of like it, actually. If you take the broad strokes of the major storylines, they actually work pretty well to tell stories about kids who all feel ostracized in their own way. But they talk so damn much and so damn badly that you'd never know. And the visuals, oh my god, the awful visuals. The draw distance is so low that you've got constant, jarring, obvious pop-in, sometimes on the Pokemon themselves, meaning you accidentally wander straight into a fight. And it's a surprise that the pop-in is so bad, considering the models and textures are more often than not really bad. A GameCube could probably load these textures faster. So for the future, we need the Breath of the Wild team to work on the graphics, and I don't know, the Mario team on the dialogue. It won't be better, there will just be less of it. But I do think that I kinda like this game in a guilty pleasure sort of way, and it does feel like they're making efforts to improve step by step. It just hurts when they spend years doing so and the progress is so small. Fire Emblem Engage. Oh man, this game is not good. I thought maybe my distaste was just because it was very fan service oriented and played similarly to older games, but apparently even fans of the franchise don't care for this one. You know, all two that I spoke with. I know it doesn't always make sense in the story to do this, but I do really miss the customization features they added in Three Houses. The level of growth felt different, and now all we're left with is the same standard Fire Emblem fare. Perhaps even more standard, since it relies on heroes from old games. You can probably just do another playthrough of Three Houses and skip this one while we wait for a port for Awakening. While the Switch sure made its death slow and painful, it did start to pump out fewer titles by this point. But Nintendo had to make sure that their console was memorialized on the list of best-selling consoles, so they had to find some way to stall. Thus, even bigger remakes. I haven't talked about many of them, but I did want to give a shout out to the remakes this year because I remember them feeling pretty big at the time. Maybe just because of how recent they were. Metroid Prime Remastered was a big hit thanks to giving it an actual control scheme, but also felt a little bit like they were stalling for fans who were waiting for Prime 4. Advance Wars was a remake nobody saw coming, and honestly I'd be a bit curious to know if they ever plan on making new ones. Advance Wars is kind of fun, even if it is basically Fire Emblem. It's different, I swear. And by far the biggest one was Super Mario RPG. We would also get a remake next year for Paper Mario 2, and those titles definitely drummed up some hype. But especially in regards to Super Mario RPG, fans of that game haven't stopped talking about Geno since it came out, and a whole mess of litigation problems was supposedly keeping any talk of this game out. They even removed the reference to Geno in a Mario and Luigi remake. That's how bad it got. But Square and Nintendo must be working on their differences, and it's pretty clear Nintendo is still interested in finding the spark that people loved from the old Mario RPG games. Let's just hope they find it soon, wink wink. For 6 years since the release of Breath of the Wild, all anyone could really think about was whether or not we'd be getting a sequel. Now that we got one, everybody called it an expansion pack to Breath of the Wild. I wasn't the biggest fan of Breath of the Wild, I thought it was a good game, just not for me. Naturally, that feeling should have continued, except Tears of the Kingdom was its own game, you absolute donkeys! While Breath's power set was focused on creative problem solving, Tears took a step back and said, what if the problems are even vaguer and the powers even broader? This whole game is about creating new solutions to your problems, and yes, sometimes solutions is your name for a moblin horn on a stick. From weapons to puzzle solutions to methods of transportation, you spend most of this game using the absolutely crazy creation system to create giant flaming pissman. Add to that the intricate layers of the sky world and the dark depths, and it truly is an interesting environment to navigate. There was probably a story here too, but I spent over 80 hours on this game and didn't manage to finish it. I got stuck on something, and now every time I boot up the game I'm reminded how stuck I am on that thing, and I get depressed about how uncreative I am. Don't let that say anything about my video making skills. Everybody 1-2 Switch exists, and I'm sorry if this is the first time you're hearing that. On the bright side, we also got a new Mario. No, not Odyssey 2, that will never exist, and I'm not crying. This was a new 2D Mario called Super Mario Wonder, and let's just be thankful they didn't use the word new. Apparently that was the thing holding them back too, because this is the first 2D Mario in a while to actually have new aesthetics. Super Mario Wonder is great, there are possibly too many playable characters and half of them are for your baby brother who is bad at video games. The level designs in 2D Mario have always been creative and cool, but Wonder's main mechanic really allowed the dev team to go all out. Upon touching the Wonder Seed in a level, it will temporarily transform. Sometimes this means outrunning things in a rapidly changing landscape, sometimes this means changing the game into a top-down style, and sometimes it's a musical now, and I'm a sucker for musical levels. It's a shame this game peaked with level 2, but I guess the platforming stays good throughout. The piranha plants just stop singing after that is all. And while the story is nothing to write home about, it does involve Bowser who turned himself into a castle. If that's not a track in Mario Kart 9, I don't know what else to say. The new powers were okay, one was great for people with way more skill than me, and the other we can't talk about or else the algorithm might get the wrong idea about me. The biggest plus for me was the online multiplayer, Asterisk. The ghost multiplayer mechanic was kind of cool, especially when it worked automatically. It wasn't as great for playing with friends, but you did have local co-op for that, and maybe the next one will go all the way. Finishing up 2023, we have a second Warioware game? Somebody's getting ambitious. Maybe the devs finally realized that we had motion controls on the Joy-Con and that smooth moves on the Wii was one of their best sellers because WarioWare Move It brings back the motion-controlled microgame mayhem. I love WarioWare games quite a bit for the 15 seconds I'm interested in them. I hate that I can't enjoy them longer, but I'm really not an arcadey high-score gamer. So I always end up buying these games just to play through the story. Yes, I already know that's a bit odd, but I'm okay with it. There's one main issue I have with this game. Every time you have to do a new pose for a microgame, the game will stop and do a minute-long unskippable exposition to teach you about it. In a game where each microgame lasts like 5 seconds, a full minute of waiting around is unbearably slow. In fact, it took so long waiting for those screens that it's 2024 now. Thanks. 2024 was a weird year for me. At this point, I fully believed we would stop getting new releases due to rumors of a new console that was supposedly coming out. But I guess the slightly larger Nintendo Switch wasn't ready at this point, so they kept the titles coming. Mario vs. Donkey Kong tricked me real bad. I don't like Lemmings, which is what the franchise basically turned into, but the trailers showed gameplay similar to Mario vs. Donkey Kong on the GBA. I wonder why that is. Yeah, it was a remaster. They have the same name and everything. I am very dumb. They added a few new levels, but I had just recently played the original in an absolutely legitimate way, so I wasn't super interested. Speaking of not super interested, I would be a fool not to at least mention Princess Peach Showtime. Unfortunately, I didn't play it, so it'll be tough to do anything other than mention it, but here goes. The game was neat, not super difficult, but very clearly marketed towards kids and Peach fans, the latter of which make me slightly uncomfortable. I'm not a Peach fan myself, but I am a fan of strong female representation in video games, which is why I didn't play this game. Every Peach game feels just a little sexist. Although this one was not quite as bad as girl fights bad guys by crying or getting angry. Women, am I right? And honestly, I'm mostly just poking fun at it anyway. I think it was a fine game, and it makes sense to give a different playable character different gameplay. There'd be no sense in making a Zelda game where you play as Zelda, but she does the same thing as Link. The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is a great game, absolutely ruined by dum-dums like myself. I'm not smart enough for this game. I really want to find creative uses for all sorts of things, but it's so easy to find the overpowered items and abuse them. Once I found the flying floor tile that pretty much crosses any gap for you, the platforming became a cinch. But let me back up a bit, because what am I even talking about? In Echoes of Wisdom, you play as another girl. Video games truly are too woke, but if you're not a complete asshole who believes what I just said, this game is the perfect blend of traditional 2D Zelda and modern games like Breath of the Wild. Somehow they've managed to capture that expansive open world feel in a map that honestly isn't that large. But there are so many things to do and so many people to see, and of course, so many echoes to copy. See, Zelda doesn't fight with a sword. Unless you want to, then she does. Instead, she has a wand called Try who can make clones of objects and enemies that you've collected. This makes it interesting to solve puzzles because oftentimes the solutions are simple, but the methods are slightly different, forcing you to play around with different combos to see what will work. Until, as I mentioned before, you get comfortable with one thing that can solve many puzzles. I spent a good amount of time getting about halfway and then dropped it when I realized I was doing this too much. But it's been a long enough time that I'll probably pick it back up again because it is an extremely fun experience. What have I been doing since I dropped Zelda? Complaining about Mario Party titles mostly. Super Mario Party Jamboree does a double whammy of having a mediocre title and confusing your grandma. This would all be fine, except we all know the next title will be another throwback game called Mario Party Super Duper Stars. But strange name aside, Jamboree is honestly one of the best Mario Party games. Maybe not quite as amazing as 6 or 7, but those are high bars. There are plenty of game modes to try out, plenty of game boards to play on, and a handful of new and returning minigames to lose friends and ruin controllers with. They know the Joy-Con aren't the sturdiest, why do they make us wiggle so? Jamboree seems to be taking the Mario Kart approach of supplementing its roster with old content to fill out a bit more, and I think it's a great idea. Even today people go back to the old games anyway. We don't need 6 new boards every time, especially when everybody only likes 1 or 2 from each game. Just bring back Windmillville and Clockwork Castle next time and we'll never need another new game. I already talked about Mario and Luigi Brothership, but that certainly won't stop me from talking some more. See, that game is long and I have more hours in it now. It's still good. It was weird to see a new title in the dead franchise, but as the world's second biggest Mario and Luigi fan, I'm far from disappointed. And to see a game better than the last couple of 3DS titles was an even better surprise. If you still haven't gotten it and are on the fence, let me tell you this. The story is better than any Mario and Luigi game, which isn't saying much, it's still bad. The gameplay is fresh and fun while still being the same old turn-based QTE action we know and love. The only thing that might be a turn-off is that it is twice as long as it needs to be. There's a lot of content here and not as many special moves as some other titles, so you'll be very familiar with the few that you have. That's not to say it isn't worthwhile. Some of of the humor was just genuinely laugh out loud funny, and there were a lot of fun little side quests and objectives to keep things a bit less monotonous. And there are also a decent number of enemies and bosses to learn the attacks of, so it doesn't get old too quickly. Of course, I am saying all of this as someone who still hasn't finished it, so maybe take it in small chunks. And as of writing this, there haven't been any major releases in 2025, and there's a chance there won't be. We don't know when the Switch 2 will release, but honestly, if it has half as many good titles, it'll still be successful in my eyes. And maybe Metroid Prime 4 and Pokemon Z will release on the new console, who knows? The Nintendo Switch was a massively successful console, and while it definitely stretched out its lifespan to meet that goal, it still is no surprise that it did well. I think it's a system that will live on in our hearts for a long time to come, at least partially because the next console is also called the Switch.